My name is Dr. Rick Seguil.
And action. Hey, Jay had a... This is Kirk And action. Hey everyone, it's Dr. Rick. And Tim had a question on concussion. Concussion can be any form of traumatic brain injury. But if this is the first time you're finding me, don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below. And if you do like the video, please put a thumbs up. It helps the website progress on. So let's see. Concussion is essentially when the brain gets shaken, it doesn't like what happens. The brain is made up of millions of neurons, nerve tissue. Nerve tissues have a soma or a head and then a tail. And then the tail contacts the next head, and that has a tail, and that contacts the next head, and that has a tail. So you have this train of neurons that are just all squeezed into the brain. Now, if you have, let's just break it down to something real easy. If you have a thought, I want to move my finger. The brain initiates the thought somewhere in the forebrain, and then it goes into the motor area, and it goes down to the neck, it goes down into the arm, and then it moves the muscle. And then the muscle that moves sends its feedback back up to the brain, back up the arm, back into the base brain, back into the forebrain, and saying, we moved. And that's pretty much what happens, and then the movement stops. Now that's the basic network of what happens, but there's many other things that can happen. Circuits that stop that movement, circuits that say you shouldn't move, or circuits that say you should move more, especially if it's cold out. Circuits that say, be quiet, there's a predator, don't move at all. So there's all these circuits, and that's why there's a million of them. And they all interrelate. Sometimes one circuit will borrow another circuit. So this bunch of circuits, if you shake it up a lot, you're going to do something bad to those connections. And those connections, again, are based on a head and a tail, and another head and another tail. Well, between the tail and the next head, there's a space. It's a synapse, and the synapse of, say, the tail part of the synapse will secrete, to send a message on down, will secrete a neurotransmitter. Neurotransmitter goes across the synapse, gets into the head of the next nerve, and then stimulates a reaction. And that sends an electric impulse really fast. And then that one has a tail that secretes another neurotransmitter, and it sends it across the space. So that's how it happens in a matter of milliseconds. It's really cool. Now, what happens when you do this is that you can actually damage some of those tails. They're called dendrites. Or you can irritate the dendrites so it won't produce the neurotransmitters. Or the trauma from the blood vessels being disrupted and broken around the nerve, remember, around the nerve tissue, the blood vessels will leak, and blood with its iron, a heme, is irritating. If you've ever had a wisdom tooth and you taste it, it hurts. If you swallow that blood, you get diarrhea, you get nauseated, because blood iron is irritating. Well, it definitely is irritating to a shaken brain or a concussed brain. So the problem is, even if the nerve is the head and the tail and the next head and the next tail, even if that's intact, all that blood that's leaking around that nerve tissue is irritating the heck out of that very delicate tissue. And then it won't fire off properly. Then the nerve will be irritated. And if you've ever had a migraine, that's an irritation to nerve tissue. Boy, that makes you feel terrible. It gives you headaches, makes it difficult to think, you can't sleep, can't stay awake, can't concentrate, can't calculate. Your mood is terrible. And that's because the nerve tissue is very delicate. So that's what, in a nutshell, happens when you concuss a brain. Now, there's a couple of things that you can do. I feel for Tim, because being hit by a train car is even if it's 15 miles an hour, is not fun. Being hit by anything, even a linebacker, 250-pound linebacker at 50 miles an hour, that's going to hurt something when you're pushed. So the idea is if you do have that episode of having the brain shaken and it goes through a little bleeding and it goes through a little axonal disruption, then you want it to heal up. So the reason for this video is people who have had concussions, I think the majority of patients should be able to heal up about a month. But if you don't heal up, it could be that the normal things that were there before, like a sleep disorder, like a little anxiety, like a little dependence on alcohol, like poor sleep and poor healing, might all be adding up to make that new traumatic brain injury difficult to heal. So what you want to do is, even if it was tolerated before, fix those other little things so that the brain can really heal as best as it can. So those of you who think that you can get by with alcohol, think you can get by with eating fast food, crappy food, trans fats, probably not a good idea while you're healing up. You talk to any coach, if you have somebody on the bench and you want that star player to get back on the bench, you give that star player all the things that he needs to heal up. Tell him to sleep properly, tell him to eat real well, tell him not to overdo it on days that he's training. Definitely tell him to train, but not so much. So those things they all have to be called on when you're trying to heal up your concussed brain. So food, I would stay away from dairy. Food, I would increase the foods that you get exposed to that help heal. And if you have that basic understanding, add on other supplements. I think that turmeric is a great anti-inflammatory herb. Whoops, that is turmeric. So, sorry for there you go. That's turmeric. Turmeric is a great anti-inflammatory herb. I take this 3 times a day just because I think it helps with inflammation. Taking the powder, well, you'd have to take a lot of powder. So check out my video on the turmeric powder unboxing that I have. It'd be gobs of powder, and that might cause a constipation issue, but turmeric is great. The other thing that's great is DHA, omega-3 oil. This is a plant-based version, but you can find fish oil that's pretty decent. Carlson and Nordic Naturals is fine. I really don't think you have to worry too much about mercury, but if you're not worried about mercury, take Viva. I have a video I did for Ryan on what type of fish oil is good. If you're worried, just take Nordic Naturals and or Carlson. You're going to be spending a lot of money. I just happen to take Flora because I'm a vegetarian at this point, and I think fish oil or total omega-3, whether it comes from fish or plant or yeast, will help, has an anti-inflammatory. Turmeric will help, has an anti-inflammatory. So if you throw good food and additional anti-inflammatories in, I think your chances are higher. Now, you don't have to switch to vegetarian or vegan. You just might want to decrease the processed foods. Processed foods that you get from McDonald's, French fries, foods that are kept on the shelf for months at a time, they usually have all the nutrients cut out and these products, chemicals in them that make them have a long shelf life. And that's not good. That's usually inflammatory, so that's not good for a healing brain. Alcohol, definitely not good for a healing brain because it might get you to sleep because it makes you tired. But the alcohol itself is most of the times with regards to beer and wine, and depending on hard liquor, what you drink the hard liquor with, usually has a high amount of sugar and carbohydrate. That's not good for your brain. So I would probably stay away from that during your healing process. Sorry, I would say that. But because a lot of my young athletes or my older guys will be used to the episodes or the things they're doing before the injury, like having a beer on the weekends, having a couple beers on the weekends, maybe smoking a little bit of tobacco, maybe eating fast foods, maybe not sleeping deeply because they want to watch a bunch of Netflix, maybe playing a lot of games. So all those things really don't help. So you want to get rid of that again while you're in the healing phase. Other things you can do are, I think, because the brain, when it's going through pain, anguish, inflammation, and all that stuff affects your sleep, you want to be able to, and you wake up with brain fog because the sleep is screwed up, I think you want to try to maximize on your sleep. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is this is the normal circadian rhythm, or actually, see, a sleep cycle. Sleep cycle used to be stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, REM, and then back to stage 1. That's what now it's N1, N2, and N3, and then REM is still the same, rapid eye movement. Rapid eye movement is when you get your dreams, but the healing usually occurs in stage N2, not stage, but N2 and 3. So the more episodes that you get into N2 and N3, the more healing you have. So usually what happens with a cycle of sleep is you get to sleep at 10 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, and you slowly drift off to sleep. The brain waves that fire what's called beta waves fast because you're thinking. They slow down, especially with no stimulation and less blue light and less noise and cooler temperature. They slow down to alpha, theta, and delta. So it goes from beta to alpha to theta to delta waves, really slow. And the brain waves, it never goes to zero, or else that's brain death. But it has to go into it, and then it comes out a little bit, goes into REM, goes back into it, comes out, goes back to REM, goes into it. So it does that about 6 cycles a night, 7 if you're lucky. The longer you stay in REM, and the length of time in REM lengthens as you get to the later hours of your sleep, like early morning, unless you have to pee, unless you have to take your dog for a walk, unless your partner's waking you up, unless you have centralized sleep apnea or obstructive sleep apnea, the more you dream. And the more longer you this is not exact, but the longer you stay into touch N1, N2, the more you rehab. So if you can touch that N1, N2 even more deeper and stay in it, that when the brain is in N1, N2 and you're essentially in paralysis, then you'll move a little bit, but when you're in the right stage, you'll freeze. And during the freezing part of diving into these cycles, your body will rebuild. Your brain will also rebuild. And the best thing that happens in N2 and N3 is that the brain prunes those nerve dendrites and axons that aren't necessary. Meaning that when you learn something in the daytime, you start a thought, you learn a certain process, and it goes back, well, like learning E equals mc squared. I just said that, energy equals mass well, I forget what the constant is, but and when you get a formula that you'll learn, you're later on, if you get really good sleep, and you can contemplate on that formula, and you think about the formula, and you remember, I learned that formula when I was in this class, and that person was sitting next to me. Well, you don't have to you have to remember all those other things. So what happens when you're in N2 and N3? The brain prunes those extra ideas and just makes it a succinct, very important memory because you're holding it as high value. Now, if you don't get to that portion of sleep just once, maybe because you never really get to sleep, you'll never be able to prune the extra crap in learning how to formulate an answer or cook a recipe or drive to Chicago or change a diaper. You'll have all these other things that aren't pruned that will make it very confusing for you to bring up that memory again. So that's why sleep, getting into N1, N2, N3, REM is very important, especially the N2, N3 part, the slow wave, the delta wave. So if you do have a before the trauma, if you had a problem with sleep, it's really going to get bad at the time of your concussion. And it can last for years. So the objective, especially with Tim, is have no fear. Truly, the concussion should be done. 15-mile-an-hour hit from a train car, I mean, that's a big injury, but it should heal itself up. So what I would do, again, is maximize on food, maximize on turmeric. Turmeric is thought to be, because it's heavy in India, India has the lowest amount of Alzheimer's disease in the world, it's thought to be healing for the brain. Maximize on omega-3. I would also consider taking CBD. Cannabidiol. Cannabidiol is CBD from the plant, medical cannabis. THC is also from the plant, medical cannabis. I have 2 videos on tincture and anti-inflammatory portions, and I think that the THC will help you, especially if you have a post-traumatic stress disorder, help you stop the turning on the alarm at night. It sometimes gets you to decrease your REM, the THC. And that could be good, especially if it's post-traumatic stress. But the CBD will help you with the inflammation part, help you get to N2, N3. That's the theory. THC, CBD, both from the same plant, they help with inflammation. So I think that you have to, but you have to do some research and you got to read. We have to be concise with regards to suggestions. And I usually suggest THC at night, higher than the CBD. THC at night for about 3 weeks straight at least. Reset your circadian rhythm, have a very distinct time that you get ready for bed, and also have a very distinct time that you stop loud music, blue light on the screen, exercise, eating right before that time when you're getting to sleep. If you start to prep your pre-sleep and then your sleep, and you keep it to a very regimented time period and ritual, and then in the morning, if you constantly wake up at the same time every day, do the same ritual, that would be very important. And then during the daytime, have your meal, and then prepare for sleep again. You do that ritualistic activity, it will help the brain attain rhythm. And if the brain can attain a circadian rhythm, it will adapt to the rhythm, and hopefully, maybe, these things, the THC, the CBD, will initiate a little bit of sleep. That's the other problem, the other benefit of THC, makes you sleepy. Alcohol makes you sleepy too, but it makes you wake up later, and I've done alcohol videos, so check them out down below. I would really avoid alcohol, and it's going to be a problem to avoid, especially if you're used to it, but the THC might help you. Other things you might want to do too, I think some things to relax. If you don't like THC or CBD, or you're a DOT driver, you can't take anything because of the risk of testing for THC. You can take ashwagandha. Think ashwagandha, and I've done a video on this, is an adaptogen. It helps the adrenals reset, but it also relaxes. It's an herb from India. Again, India's got so many great herbs. Ashwagandha at night, and if you're totally stressed out, ashwagandha daytime would be fine, but I'd rather have you take rhodiola. Again, an herb that might help. Why? Because I think the nerves that get disrupted do need a little bit of a jump start. And sometimes you can even get to the point of neurotransmitters, or if those cells that were disrupted, the head of the nerve and then the tail of the nerve, sometimes to transmit the electricity and produce the chemicals at the tail end, you have to have the mitochondria working properly. And if you've really shaken up the nerve, the mitochondria won't be able to do their job. And sometimes taking things to stimulate the mitochondria to work even better might get you there faster. So I don't have it here, but I would usually say that using food and maybe macronutrient dialing in will help you to make the nerve and the mitochondria, the energy factories, work better and heal faster. So this is just a book to intermittent fasting and ketosis. I wanted to show it to you because a ketogenic diet, according to the work of D'Agostino in University of Florida, has helped with Navy SEALs and seizures. And sometimes when you have it, my application of his information says, if you have a brain injury or nerve injury, I think that if you're dialing in your diet and you've done the supplements I talked about and it's still difficult, or you're still having brain fog, that's the difficulty with the nerves firing off properly, that's the manifestation, brain fog, fatigue, difficulty with concentration, difficulty with problem solving, moodiness. Doing a ketogenic diet or a well-formulated ketogenic diet will probably give every cell in your brain a little bit more energy to extract what it needs. Because if we're used to carbohydrates and the carbohydrates aren't working properly, or the mitochondria isn't working properly, give the mitochondria a break by feeding it mostly fat. It's a second fuel source and it might work better. Again, it worked with seizure control in Navy SEALs who are using rebreathers. I think I would apply that and maybe hyperbaric oxygen to anybody that's been concussed. But it's hard to get hyperbaric oxygen therapy. It's easy to do a ketogenic diet or take ketone salts. So the final thing would be you really have to remove yourself from stress. And I think nature therapy is awesome. This is from a friend of mine from Harvard, Ava Selhub. And having a relaxation practice is really important. Having meditative practice is really important. Whether you have a concussion, sleep disorder, or just plain old sleep disorder, sometimes, not sometimes, but what Herb Benson found is that when he's a doctor out of Harvard, in the 70s he studied Tibetan monks. I think they were Tibetan. But he wanted to see why these guys were meditating, if there was any benefit. So he gave them an oxygen sensor, he gave them a pulse regulator, he gave them a respiratory measurement thing that was around their chest, and while they were meditating, he stuck a thermometer in their butts. And he found that temperature dropped, pulse rate dropped, heart rate dropped. It was spectacular while they were meditating. And the other thing that he found, not only with those external vital signs, he went on to study DNA. He found that the DNA, that chromosomes that were studied in meditators and then non-meditators, the meditators had something happen with their chromosomes, activity with their chromosomes that the non-meditators didn't have. He didn't find, I think he got the sequence of the DNA basis, but they weren't able to figure out what those sequences meant. The bottom line is that there was something that happened down to the DNA. That's epigenetic. And all you had to do is meditate. So whether you meditate twice a day, 5 minutes of 4-7-8 breath in the morning, but when your feet hit the floor, 5 minutes of 4-7-8 breathing at night when your head hits the pillow, I think that's fine. That's what I do. Or you can go deep, like learn a mantra from Deepak Chopra, or you can get a guided imagery or a mindful practice from your psychologist. I think it's very important to reproduce that. Get the mind to exercise. Again, if you have an injury, say in your shoulder, and you just let it sit because it hurts, you're just going to have a non-painful but weak, tight shoulder. If you have an injury in your shoulder and you let it rest, but every once in a while you exercise it and move it, you'll be able to take the pain down, but intentionally build the muscle up so it doesn't get any more atrophic or tiny, and then actually get past that and build the muscle to where it was performing before. Same thing with the brain. If you have a concussion, difficulty with breathing, thinking, and those cells aren't working properly, do everything else I talked about tonight, including doing the maximizing on your sleep cycle for regenerative health and dreams, and then maybe taking the supplements I was talking about, maybe changing your macronutrient, maybe getting healthy with your diet, maybe getting ritualized with regards to nighttime, daytime, eat time, nighttime, daytime, eat time, and a meditative practice. And I think you'll just speed up the healing process. So hopefully, Tim, this gives you a little bit of an idea of what to do. Again, the idea is just psychotherapy is important. I think you have to consider it. But when you have a concussion that's affecting you, your thinking, your ability to get back into work, and all those around you, because it will, your tolerance, your problem solving, you'll be thinking from what's called a default mode. All of us can act from the reptilian brain, run from fire, defend from a fight, run away, yell. We can all do those things, eat, sleep, poop. We can all do those things. Even a frog can do those things. But we have a higher level of functioning that depends on the frontal brain. And sometimes when you have a concussion, it's very easy to just sit back and do the basics. But you want to move forward and develop the frontal stuff to work just like a well-oiled machine again. And hopefully this gives you a little bit of an idea. Those of you who have had concussion, then maybe just have plain old sleep disorder, if you have used medical cannabis or anti-inflammatory herbs, or if you've found hyperbaric chambers are great, please put them in the comments down below. Otherwise, don't forget to subscribe, thumbs up if you liked it, and I'll see you at the next video.